The 1960s didn't just change music and politics. It rewired the human nervous system through cinema. Studios received bomb threats. Directors had their careers destroyed overnight. One film triggered actual vomiting in theaters across Europe. These 15 horror films didn't just push boundaries. They obliterated them, faced bans across continents, and created the template for everything that terrifies you today. Number 15, The Tingler, 1959. William Castle wasn't satisfied with merely scaring audiences. He wanted to physically assault them. This Vincent Price vehicle introduced one of cinema's most insane gimmicks ever conceived by a showman desperate to separate viewers from their composure. Castle wired select theater seats with military surplus vibrating motors. When the creature appeared on screen, random audience members felt something crawling up their spines. Literally. The film's premise sounds almost quaint today. A parasitic creature that feeds on fear lives inside every human spine. The only way to destroy it is to scream. But Castle's execution turned this B-movie concept into a cultural phenomenon that had people fainting, screaming, and in some cases, filing lawsuits against theaters. One woman in Philadelphia reportedly had a heart episode during the climactic sequence. Critics dismissed it as carnival hokum. They weren't entirely wrong. But Castle understood something profound about horror that respectable filmmakers ignored. The genre exists to create physical sensations. His percepto gimmick made audiences complicit in their own terror. You couldn't trust your own seat. The film grossed over $3 million against a minimal budget. Castle proved that horror wasn't just about what appeared on screen. It was about transforming the theater itself into a haunted house where anything could happen to anyone at any moment without warning. Number 14, The Innocents, 1961. Jack Clayton took Henry James's celebrated ghost story and transformed it into something that made audiences profoundly uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate. Deborah Kerr plays a governess convinced that supernatural forces are corrupting the children in her care. The film never confirms whether ghosts exist or whether she's experiencing a complete psychological breakdown. That ambiguity disturbed viewers more than any monster could. What made censors nervous wasn't violence or explicit content. It was the film's suggestion that children could harbor darkness. The relationship between young Miles and the spectral presence of his deceased valet carries implications that 1960s audiences weren't prepared to process. Clayton filmed children's faces in ways that made innocence itself seem threatening. Critics called it unwholesome and disturbing in ways difficult to pinpoint. Cinematography by Freddie Francis created shadows that seemed alive. Every corner of Bly Manor contained potential menace. The film's final image remains one of horror cinema's most debated conclusions. Is the governess a protector or a destroyer? Did she save a soul or extinguish one? The Innocents proved that restraint could terrify more effectively than explicit content. No blood appears on screen. No monsters manifest definitively. Yet the film leaves audiences with a creeping dread that persists for days. Modern horror filmmakers consistently cite it as the template for psychological terror that respects audience intelligence while thoroughly unsettling them. Number 13, Mill of the Stone, Women, 1960. Italian horror announced itself to the world with this technicolor nightmare that customs officials in multiple countries flagged for destruction. Giorgio Ferroni crafted a tale of obsession, preservation, and medical horror that predated everything audiences thought modern horror invented. A sculptor keeps his daughter alive through blood transfusions taken from murdered women. Their bodies are displayed as wax figures in a traveling exhibition. The film's color palette shocked audiences accustomed to black and white horror. Blood appeared crimson. Flesh tones looked sickly and wrong. The production design created a world where beauty and decay existed simultaneously, where art objects revealed themselves as preserved corpses upon closer examination. British censors demanded extensive cuts. German distributors refused initial release entirely. What truly disturbed viewers was the film's medicalization of horror. Laboratories filled with tubes and pumps, bodies suspended in chemical solutions. The villain isn't a supernatural creature, but a father whose love has curdled into something monstrous. He genuinely believes he's protecting his daughter while leaving a trail of drained corpses across the countryside. This film essentially created the template for Italian horror that would dominate the following decades. The emphasis on visual excess, on making horror beautiful while simultaneously revolting, on treating violence as aesthetic experience. Every giallo film owes something to Mill of the Stone Women. It proved European horror would play by different rules than Hollywood ever permitted. Number 12. Black Sunday, 1960. Mario Bava's directorial debut got him banned from British screens for 8 years. The opening sequence alone explains why. A woman accused of witchcraft has a spiked bronze mask hammered into her face, while audiences watched in close-up detail. 1960 viewers had never witnessed anything remotely comparable. Reports indicate some patrons left theaters permanently changed. Barbara Steele became an instant horror icon through her dual performance as both witch and innocent descendant. Her face, those enormous eyes capable of expressing both victimhood and malevolence, defined Gothic horror for an entire generation. Bava photographed her like a Renaissance painter, capturing damnation itself. Every frame could hang in a museum dedicated to beautiful nightmares. The film drew from Russian folklore and Italian Gothic traditions that American audiences found exotic and deeply unsettling. Resurrection sequences featured decomposing flesh reconstituting itself. A character discovers their beloved has been dead for 2 centuries while believing they were alive. A mixture of romance and horror created something new and genuinely transgressive. American distributors tried releasing a heavily censored version. It still disturbed audiences. The atmosphere Bava created couldn't be cut away. It existed in lighting choices, in camera movements, in Steele's performance that suggested depths of suffering and revenge that extended beyond anything explicitly shown. Black Sunday proved that horror's real power resided in suggestion amplified by absolute artistic mastery. Number 11. Carnival of Souls, 1962. Herc Harvey made one film. That film haunts every director who's seen it. Shot for approximately $30,000 with a cast of unknowns in abandoned buildings across Kansas, this regional production created a template for atmospheric horror that Hollywood couldn't replicate with unlimited resources. A woman survives a car accident only to find herself increasingly disconnected from reality, drawn toward an abandoned pavilion where ghoulish figures seem to await her. The organ score by Gene Moore sounds like a church service in purgatory. Candice Hilligoss delivers a performance of disconnection that feels genuinely unsettling rather than merely acted. She exists between worlds, and you can see it in her eyes. Critics initially ignored the film entirely. Drive-in audiences made it a cult phenomenon through word of mouth alone. Harvey used the abandoned Saltaire Pavilion in Utah as his primary location. The building looks like civilization's corpse. Peeling paint, empty dance floors, shadows that seem to move independently. He shot the ghoul sequences with pale makeup and minimal special effects. They shouldn't work. They're terrifying because they feel real in ways expensive productions couldn't achieve. Film's final revelation predates countless psychological horror twists that audiences now consider innovative. Carnival of Souls did it first, did it better, and did it for less money than most productions spend on catering. David Lynch, George Romero, and countless others acknowledge this regional oddity as foundational to their understanding of cinematic dread. Number 10. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962. Robert Aldrich transformed 2 fading Hollywood legends into something genuinely monstrous. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford brought their real-life hatred onto screen, and that authentic venom created sequences that made audiences deeply uncomfortable. A former child star holds her wheelchair-bound sister prisoner while descending into delusion. The cruelty depicted wasn't supernatural. It was entirely human, and therefore infinitely more disturbing. The dead rat dinner scene became instantly infamous. Test audiences reportedly gasped audibly. But the film's true horror lies in watching Davis transform into Baby Jane Hudson, a grotesque parody of childhood innocence preserved in a 60-year-old body. Her makeup, her mannerisms, her voice create something that lives in uncanny valley before that term existed. Warner Brothers expected a modest return on their investment in 2 actresses considered washed up. The film grossed $4 million and revitalized both careers while creating the hagsploitation genre that would produce dozens of imitators. None matched the original's perfect alchemy of camp, cruelty, and genuine psychological insight. Critics initially dismissed it as tasteless, Time revealed it as a savage examination of Hollywood's treatment of women, of fame's corrosive effects, of dependency relationships that transform love into torture. The final beach scene, where Jane's madness completes itself, while Blanche finally tells the truth, remains one of horror cinema's most emotionally devastating conclusions. Number 9. Repulsion, 1965. Roman Polanski's London apartment becomes an architecture of psychological collapse. Catherine Deneuve plays a young manicurist whose mental state deteriorates while alone in her sister's flat. Walls crack open. Hands emerge from corridors. The corpses of her victims accumulate while she descends into catatonia. British censors demanded cuts. They didn't fully understand what they were witnessing. Neither did audiences. This wasn't monster movie horror. This was watching a human mind dissolve from inside. Deneuve barely speaks through much of the film. Her enormous eyes register terror at things only she can perceive. Polanski films her apartment with increasingly distorted geometry. Hallways stretch impossibly long. Shadows accumulate density. The sound design creates an oral nightmare of ticking clocks and dripping water and heartbeats that might be imagined. The violence, when it arrives, feels almost inevitable. She's been decomposing before our eyes. The physical acts simply manifest internal destruction that's been building throughout. Critics were divided. Some called it irresponsible, claiming it exploited mental illness for cheap thrills. Others recognized a masterpiece of subjective horror that placed audiences inside an experience usually invisible to outsiders. Repulsion established psychological horror as legitimate artistic expression. It proved that the genre could explore human consciousness with the same sophistication as any prestige drama. Deneuve's wordless performance communicates volumes about isolation, fear, and the fragility of mental stability when support systems disappear. Number 8. Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Georges Franju's French horror masterpiece made audiences pass out during its Paris premiere. A surgeon kidnaps young women to graft their faces onto his daughter, who was disfigured in an accident he caused. The surgical sequences were filmed with documentary precision. 1960 viewers had never watched a face being removed from a living person in real time with clinical detail. The film shouldn't work as well as it does. The premise sounds exploitative. The execution elevates it to poetry. Edith Scobb's performance as the faceless daughter creates profound sympathy for someone who should be merely pitiful. Her mask, expressionless yet somehow radiating sadness, became one of horror cinema's most iconic images. Billy Idol later referenced it. John Carpenter cited it. The aesthetic influence continues expanding. Franju balanced his graphic surgical sequences with scenes of genuine beauty. The daughter walks through the family estate in flowing white gowns. Doves flutter around her masked figure. The contrast between ethereal imagery and medical horror creates something uniquely disturbing. You cannot look away even when the film demands you should. The ending provides catharsis that most horror films deny. But even that catharsis carries melancholy rather than triumph. The daughter achieves freedom through violence, releases the dogs and doves her father experimented on, and walks into fog while her face remains forever destroyed. Beauty is gone. Only grace remains. Number 7. Blood Feast, 1963. Herschel Gordon Lewis invented a genre because he was bored making nudist camp documentaries. Shot in Miami for approximately $24,000 in 4 days, Blood Feast showed audiences explicit dismemberment for the first time in motion picture history. Tongues ripped from mouths, limbs hacked away, brains scooped from skulls. Critics called it reprehensible. Lewis called it a Walt Whitman poem. He wasn't entirely kidding. The plot exists merely to connect mutilations. An Egyptian caterer prepares a blood feast to resurrect an ancient goddess by harvesting organs from young women. Actor Mal Arnold plays the killer with bulging eyes and golden skin that suggests either ancient mysticism or severe jaundice, depending on your interpretation. The performances are uniformly terrible. The effects are primitive. None of that matters. Lewis understood something fundamental about horror cinema. A significant audience segment wanted to see things that mainstream films refused to show. He provided those images without apology, marketing the film with vomit bags distributed to theater patrons. The controversy generated free publicity worth millions. Blood Feast earned $4 million against its minimal investment. Every splatter film, every torture sequence, every explicit horror moment in modern cinema traces directly back to this Miami cheapie made by a former English professor who wanted to see what audiences would tolerate. The answer was more than anyone expected. Lewis had created an appetite that Hollywood would eventually feel compelled to satisfy. Number 6, The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise proved that suggestion terrifies more effectively than revelation. Not a single ghost appears on screen during the entire film. You never see what pounds on the doors. You never witness what bends the walls. You only see the aftermath and the terror it creates in characters trapped inside Hill House. The film was rated for general audiences. It traumatized an entire generation. Julie Harris delivers a performance of mounting psychological disintegration as Eleanor, a repressed woman who finds herself inexplicably drawn to the house's malevolent presence. Is she experiencing supernatural phenomena or manufacturing them from her own fractured psyche? Wise refuses to answer definitively. That refusal transforms a ghost story into an examination of consciousness itself. Production design created a house that feels fundamentally wrong. Doors aren't quite square. Corridors end unexpectedly. Staircases spiral in directions that shouldn't be possible. Hill House was designed by someone whose concept of geometry came from nightmares. Cinematographer Davis Bolton shot these spaces to maximize disorientation. You never quite know where you are within this structure. Famous hand-holding scene remains one of horror's most elegant scares. We realize the horror through Eleanor's realization. Nothing graphic appears. No effects are employed. Simply a woman understanding that the hand she's been gripping doesn't belong to anyone she knows. Pure cinema, created from pure dread. Number 5. 2000 Maniacs, 1964. Herschel Gordon Lewis followed Blood Feast with something even more disturbing because it added context to carnage. Confederate ghosts resurrect annually to murder Northern tourists in revenge for Civil War atrocities. The town of Pleasant Valley, Georgia, welcomes visitors with Southern hospitality before dismembering them using increasingly creative methods involving barrels full of nails, horses pulling people apart, and rocks dropped from significant heights. The film channels genuine American historical trauma into exploitation cinema. Lewis shot in St. Cloud, Florida, using actual town residents as extras. Their enthusiasm for pretending to murder Yankee visitors reportedly unnerved even the production crew. The violence isn't just graphic, it's celebratory. The town throws a festival centered on human destruction. Banjo music plays while people die horribly. Critics completely ignored the film upon release. Drive-in audiences made it a sensation. A combination of regional specificity, historical resonance, and explicit gore created something that felt dangerous in ways Blood Feast hadn't achieved. You were watching Americans enthusiastically killing other Americans while celebrating regional identity. The subtext disturbed as much as the splatter. The film inspired remakes and homages decades later. Its influence on Southern Gothic horror continues through every film, featuring backwoods killers welcoming urban visitors with murderous intent. Lewis had created a template for American horror that exploited the nation's fundamental divisions while providing buckets of artificial blood for those who simply wanted visceral thrills. Number 4. Peeping Tom, 1960. Michael Powell's career died the moment this film premiered. Critics didn't just dislike it, they wanted it destroyed. Powell, who had created beloved British classics including The Red Shoes and A Matter of Life and Death, found himself essentially unemployable in his home country. After showing audiences a murderer who filmed his victims' final moments while stabbing them with a camera tripod blade, the film makes audiences complicit. We watch through the killer's camera. We become the voyeurs we're supposedly condemning. Powell deliberately created discomfort that couldn't be separated from the viewing experience itself. The protagonist isn't a monster. He's damaged, sympathetic, ultimately tragic. That made everything worse. You couldn't hate him purely. You had to understand him. Carl Boehm delivers a performance of agonizing vulnerability. His Mark Lewis was traumatized by a father who filmed his childhood terrors for research purposes. Now, he recreates that dynamic with murder victims, capturing their fear as they die. The psychology was too sophisticated for 1960 audiences and critics. They wanted simple monsters. Powell gave them a mirror. Time vindicated the film completely. Scorsese praised it as essential cinema. Critics who condemned it originally reconsidered their assessments. Peeping Tom now stands as one of the most important horror films ever made, a work that anticipated decades of meta-horror while examining the relationship between cameras, voyeurism, and violence with uncomfortable precision. Number 3, Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Polanski brought Satan to Manhattan, and America discovered it was terrified of its own neighbors. Mia Farrow plays a young wife who gradually realizes her pregnancy resulted from a pact between her actor husband and the elderly Satanists next door. The horror isn't the demonic conception itself. It's the systematic gaslighting that makes her doubt her own perceptions, while everyone around her serves malevolent purposes. The film arrived during cultural upheaval that made its themes feel uncomfortably relevant. Institutions couldn't be trusted. Authority figures served hidden agendas. Your spouse might betray you for personal advancement. Polanski captured American paranoia in Amber while telling a story about the most intimate violation imaginable. Religious groups protested. Anton LaVey reportedly provided consultation. Truth and rumor blended into marketing gold. Ruth Gordon won an Academy Award for playing the neighbor from hell. Her cheerful malevolence remains one of horror cinema's greatest performances. She's genuinely likable while engineering the protagonist's destruction. The casual evil she represents proved more disturbing than any monster could achieve. The film's final scene shows Rosemary accepting her child, despite knowing its father. That acceptance disturbed audiences more than any reveal. Maternal instinct overcomes even demonic origins. Polanski refused comfortable resolutions. He gave audiences a mother who chooses her monstrous baby, who rocks the cradle despite everything, who finds love where there should be only horror. Number 2, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George Romero made his first film for approximately $114,000 using Pittsburgh resources and volunteer labor. That film restructured horror cinema entirely. Zombies as we understand them today began here. The rules Romero established became genre gospel. But what truly shocked 1968 audiences was a black man leading a white cast, while America burned from racial violence. Dwayne Jones wasn't cast as a statement. Romero simply thought he gave the best audition, but Ben's race became inseparable from the film's impact. He survives the zombie apocalypse only to be shot by white militia members who mistake him for one of the undead. That ending, showing a black body being dragged with meat hooks while America consumed this film at drive-ins, created resonances that transcended horror genre boundaries entirely. The film's explicitness shocked censors and audiences. Zombies consumed human flesh on camera. A child murdered her mother with a garden tool. The unrelenting nihilism offered no comfort, no survivors worth celebrating, no redemption. Just death and more death, until the credits rolled over, still photographs suggesting documentary evidence of actual atrocities. Romero had created modern horror. Everything that followed, from Halloween to every zombie film ever made, exists in conversation with this Pittsburgh production, made by amateurs who didn't know you couldn't accomplish what they were accomplishing. Sometimes ignorance of limitations produces revolution. Night of the Living Dead proved the principle conclusively. Number 1, Psycho, 1960. Alfred Hitchcock did something unprecedented. He killed his star 40 minutes into the film. Janet Leigh, the biggest name on the poster, dies in a shower while audiences watched in absolute shock. No one had ever violated audience expectations so completely. Nothing was safe after Psycho. Every rule that governed popular cinema dissolved in that bathroom. Hitchcock demanded theaters enforce strict no late admission policies. He didn't want anyone missing the setup that made the shower sequence land with maximum impact. You followed Janet Leigh's character, sympathized with her crime, hoped for her escape. Then, Norman Bates destroys everything, while Bernard Herrmann's violin screams sounds that no one has ever forgotten. The film faced significant censorship challenges. The toilet shown on screen marked a first for American cinema. The suggestion of violence in the shower, created through editing rather than explicit imagery, still disturbed censors who couldn't articulate what exactly violated standards. Hitchcock had found the boundaries of acceptable cinema and pushed past them while technically following rules. Psycho's influence cannot be overstated. Every horror film released afterward existed in its shadow. The twist regarding Norman's mother became the template for psychological revelation in thrillers. The shower scene became the most analyzed sequence in film history. Anthony Perkins delivered a performance that defined cinematic psychosis for generations. Hitchcock had created the modern horror film. Everything else is footnotes. The 1960s didn't just birth modern horror. It proved audiences would consume darkness that previous generations considered unimaginable. These 15 films faced bans, destroyed careers, triggered protests, and changed cinema forever. Drop your hottest take below. Which film went furthest? And here's the real question that haunts me. Did these filmmakers corrupt society, or did they simply reveal what was already festering underneath our collective respectable surface?